broad knowledge base to discuss some of our favorite superheroes and supervillains. So the name of the panel comes from this misconception that Wolverines howl, which is actually fairly widespread. You see it in Marvel Wolverine Origins movie. There's a whole thing about Wolverines howling. But Hugh Jackman actually didn't know Wolverines were their own separate animal when he started and got cast. So that's kind of a fun little tidbit. So we're going to talk a little bit about them and some other superheroes. So we're going to start with, which one of these is the Wolverine? Can you pick them out? Who thinks it's number one? Raise your hand. Number two, number three, number four, number five. So it's actually number three, so good job, those of you got it.
That was more than I was expecting.
That's great. So there's a few different types of animal-themed superheroes. There's the ones that are inspired by the animal, like Batman. There's the ones that get their powers from the animal, like Spider-Man. And then there's ones that are actually empowered animals, like Rocket. So we're going to go through a couple different ones and kind of compare them to the real-life inspiration and what their weakness would be for the real animal, if that carried over as well as their abilities. So these are the guys we're going to try to cover today. So we got a few. So we're going to try to go through them pretty quick. So you may rush through a few and then hopefully come back at the end for questions. So we're going to start with Wolverine. I imagine most of you guys here today are pretty familiar with the character. He's got those claws. He's got that growling, snarling nature. He's a ferocious little short Canadian man, which matches pretty well in many ways. So the Wolverine is native to North America, and it's still found in some parts of Northern Europe and Russia. And they're very well adapted to living in snow. So they have a keen sense of smell, just like Logan, and they use that to find buried dead animals in the snow. And they're known for being very tenacious and will attack larger animals like moose, elk, even bears have been recorded being fought by Wolverines. They don't hibernate during the winter, so they're really got to find food and don't go through desperate measures to get to that. They also smell terrible. One of their common names is the skunk bear, so that also checks out pretty well. But they're best known for, at least Logan, is the claws. And real life Wolverines they don't have retractable claws. They're always kind of out. And they're made of keratin rather than bone. And that's been something of a retcon with Logan himself, where originally the gloves would contain the claws, and then later they were kind of assumed to have been added by the Weapon X program. And then later on we found out that they were actually bone, which is not how real Wolverines work. Because here we have Wolverine's son Dakin actually lost an arm in one of the recent comics. And most mammals can't regrow arms, but this is a different type of animal called an axolotl, and they can regrow arms. So, yeah, they're a cute little amphibian, and you guys know a bit more about the regeneration properties of other animals than I do, being that I just kill them. So I know the story for this guy is he actually lost his arm from his tank mate. He bit it off, and it's slowly regrowing there.
I love his tiny baby arm.
It's very Deadpool.
It's very, very Deadpool, yeah.
You can cut these guys' arms off. There's one study where they've cut off the axolotl's arm 100 times, and it's regrown perfect each and every time.
And that's actually pretty interesting because a lot of organisms that have regenerative properties, you get diminishing returns. So that arm will come back a little weird. And if you cut it off again, it'll come back twice as weird. And we do this in science, I'm sorry. We frequently lop off limbs of organisms and then see what happens. But the axolotl coming back 100% is just incredible.
And they don't even have the best regeneration in the animal kingdom. There's invertebrates that can do it even better. So we have a planarian here, which is a type of flatworm you may find in ponds around the region. There's a creature called a hydra, which if you cut off its one head, two more will take its place. You may be familiar with that slogan. And then there's starfish, which can even regenerate an entire second starfish. So there's things that heal much better than axolotls or other salamanders.
Let me elaborate on the starfish a little bit.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay, so briefly on the difference between the starfish and its ability to regenerate and humans is, so when we get a cut on our skin, if it goes through our lower layer of stem cells, we have nothing to regenerate it, so we fill that in with scar tissue. With the starfish, what ends up happening is these stem cells come from other places and flock to that injury site, and then start propagating and regenerating an arm from there.
And there's a lot of research that goes into these regenerative animals. I found some studies where if you break an axolotl's limb in the wrong place, it can confuse those cells and it will regenerate multiple limbs from that same wound site, which is pretty impressive. But here we have something called a hairy frog, which is probably the closest analog to Logan in many ways, in that it's hairy, and that they have bone claws. They're not really claws, but here on the bottom right slide, you can see there's a little bit of a bone tissue that's actually protruding out of the skin. They flex a tendon, and it causes those bones to break and kind of extrude the claw from their hand. So they have sort of bone claws. There's not a lot I could find about how they retract those claws. We don't know if they actually can or if they kind of always have little pointy bits from then on. So overall, Wolverine gets a pretty good thumbs up, but really the axolotl gets the bigger thumbs up. And from there, we're going to mention their weakness. Wolverines are dependent on big snowbanks to keep their kits, and they are threatened by climate change, and polar bears will actually eat them as well. So that's a two for there. From there, we're going to go to Ant-Man and Wasp. If you guys saw the new movie, you may have also been disappointed by a predominant lack of wasps and actual ants. But there are big things that can change size and control insects. Square cube rule, briefly, it's that their powers shouldn't work. They try to explain this in the comics briefly as, change density or some other, don't worry about it.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So, if we just focus on the abilities of ants actually, we'll get some cool stuff. And this ability to control insects isn't a new power. This is a character called the Red Bee from the Golden Age of comics, 1940s. He's in the public domain now. Make all of the Red Bee fan art you want. But he could control insects, bees particularly, and he had a favorite bee named Michael that lived in his belt, and he could deploy it to go and sting people.
It's the cutest little sound trick I've ever heard of.
So what are ants and wasps? There's a whole bunch of different kinds. They're social insects predominantly, at least the ants are. They're solitary wasps. And they're very successful. We've certainly met ants. They can communicate with each other with pheromones. So this is how they kind of hand-wave it in the movie is, stimulating the olfactory center of the ant's brain. Ants don't technically have brains. They have distributed ganglia. It doesn't matter. They don't have a central leader. They communicate through smells, and each individual ant makes decisions based on those smells that they find. And in the movie, the ants use these communications to have a lot of unique abilities. And these actually do check out pretty well. And there's a paper, if you want to look it up, that actually goes into each ant and talks a bit about the accuracy of the movie. And it's pretty good with one exception, and I'll get to that in a bit. But you may have seen this ant in your kitchen. It's our most common ant, the odorous house ant. They smell terrible, and this is a power that Scott should definitely be using. I think they smell like blue cheese, but other people disagree. They're sometimes called piss ants because they smell like urine. And there's other ants that can squirt formic acid out of their abdomen. There's ones that can explode their head to capture enemies that attack their nest.
Thank good that Hank couldn't do that.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Be a short movie.
And then there's this one, which is my favorite of our ants here. It's the honeypot ant. So they actually store food inside the other ants. And they get to be about the size of grapes. And other ants come and get the food from that ant. So really, he should have snacks in his belt all the time. And then this ant is called the Sahara silver ant, featured in an episode of Africa on Netflix. And they can operate at higher body temperatures than any other animal on the planet. They can go to about 127 degrees Fahrenheit before they die. So they can constantly be running a fever in a way that we cannot even come close to without dying.
I can't even handle 80-degree weather.
Yeah, me neither. And then Wasp also has stingers. So we're going to mention those briefly. They're found in a lot of Hymenoptera. It's a modified ovipositor. And they use this long stinger to drill into wood or other things, so they can drill into other animals, really, and lay their eggs inside and on hosts like this caterpillar. And then they burrow inside and consume the caterpillars or other grubs from the inside out. It's a unique method of reproduction called parasitoids. And this is basically the Brood from X-Men, if you're familiar with them. And then these stings are also often accompanied by venom to deter predators. And here on the right we have the bullet ants, which is featured in the Ant-Man movie. And that's rated at a 4+ by an entomologist who's been stung by more insects than anyone else on the planet. And there's some videos on YouTube of a guy trying to recreate these sting index. So if you want to look up Coyote Peterson Great Wilderness and see an idiot get stung and scream for a while, it's kind of fun. But to give you an idea, the yellow jacket is rated as a 3, and the bullet ant is rated as 4+. So it actually goes beyond what the scale does. And there's another ant or another wasp on here called the tarantula hawk wasp, which it catches tarantulas.
Which is scarier, the
Yeah.
wasp or the tarantula?
I think the wasp.
Tarantulas eat birds.
Yeah,
Some of them do, yeah.
and they drags the tarantula down underground and lays its eggs inside them. So, yeah, pretty terrifying.
Basically a xenomorph, but as a wasp.
Yeah, yeah.
So overall, Ant-Man gets high marks, with the exception of one guy doesn't fall down to the ground screaming in the movie when he gets stung by the bullet ant, which is my biggest quibble. Because they put you into like a theater for like 24 hours. It's insane. And then their weakness, of course, would be magnifying glasses. And so from that tarantula getting stung, we're going to move into Spider-Man. And you actually studied spiders as part of your master's, correct?
I did. I studied several different arthropod species. I studied wolf spiders specifically.
So, yeah, sorry to interrupt there, but we're going to kind of talk about whatever a spider can do, and with those abilities translate to Spider-Man. And one of the things he does is there's a lot of Spider-Men.
And women.
Yes.
Spider-Man and women, yeah.
It's a wide power set. So we're going to try to cover some of those broadly, but we may not be able to get into all the details of the minutia of whether the symbiote should trigger the spider sense or not. So I've spent a lot of time resizing them to be perfect, and we're using a lot of art from an artist here named Jeff Carpenter. He's over at table BB09. Go check him out if you like any of the artwork we're using
It's
here.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And this is something he just put up like shortly after I started the presentation. I was like, I have to include both versions. It's great. And it segues into these guys. Can you tell us a bit about them, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we often think of spiders as being solitary, and most of them are, but there's about 24 species of spiders that are colonial. They're usually, pretty small. They're not your big guys. And they form these vast webs that can be, depending on species, 25 feet long and maybe, I think, 10 or feet thick of just web. I know that sounds like a hellscape for most people, but it's actually kind of cool. And there are diminishing returns though, so when spiders come together, they can catch much larger prey. And about 500 spiders is the best for food availability. But there are some species that create these massive webs that can hold 50,000 spiders in one group. Sorry for your nightmares.
Yeah, we'll go to the wall crawling. So we have a picture here from the Raimi movies where the little hairs come out, and that's pretty similar to how spiders actually fly.
Right, yeah. So the picture we have here of this beautiful little foot, that's a jumping spider. And most spiders have those claws at the end of the feet to help grip. Generally that helps them grip with walking on webs. But jumping spiders are not web spiders. They're active hunters. Have you seen them in your kitchen probably or on your porch? They have big eyes.
They're so cute.
They're adorable, yeah. So what they have are these microscopic hairs called scopules, and then on those hairs are setools, which are more hair. Don't worry, there's not going to be a vocabulary quiz at the end of this presentation.
And
They
then
kind of keep everything hooked on.
some hairs they actually use for their sensing abilities.
Right, so they're hooked up to either, some of them they're called lyriform organs, which is a slit in the spider's carapace, and there are hairs that surround that. And through that they pick up vibration, and that can be vibration from what they're walking on, the substrate, or vibration in the air, like how we hear. Think about it like that. And if a Spider-Man has all these abilities, and he can just pick up all these sounds, living in a city would drive him insane. If you can picture every time the bus rolls by, or the Max, and you feel it, it's your entire body. But was there a workaround in the comics for that?
I mean, in the recent movie, he wears fake lenses on his glasses that he builds to kind of shed some of that sensory overload. Right?
Yeah, because it would be complete sensory overload for humans.
Yeah, and they communicate with each other in many ways as well, not just with sounds and vibrations. Because I mean, here we have a picture of a black widow and her mate, and the male actually strums on the web to let her know that he's okay.
Yep. Well, it's kind of risky for male spiders. I'm sure you guys know that. We have this cute little peacock spider, and they come over to the female and they do a little dance in one of these, and they keep doing that, and it says, "Hey, I'm here and I'm ready, and let's make some spider babies." But if she rejects him, she'll just eat him. And they always start with the face, so it's a pretty rough business for
Don't they end up eating them anyway?
if they can catch them. Usually what's interesting about males, and well, I can get to that when we get to web building.
Yeah. So One of Spider-Woman's powers is actually pheromones, which is something that I learned that they actually use these to communicate. I always think of that as being an ant ability and trait.
Right, pheromones, so female spiders will emit pheromones, and if they are too far away, it elicits a search response in males. So males go, oh, okay, I can kind of sense this, and I'm looking, but then when she's closer, the pheromones change their behavior into mating or courtship rituals, and that's when we get that fun little dance.
Yeah.
For the spiders.
And then one of Spider-Man's best known powers is super strength. We can talk about this a little bit. You were explaining that Spider-Man shouldn't actually be able to do this if he had spider muscles.
Right, so spider muscles or spiders' limbs work like hydraulics. They don't really use muscles, although they do have under-attached muscles. Spiders are really good at being able to do this, and that's when you see a dead spider, all that fluid is no longer being pushed out, so the limbs kind of curl in. It doesn't work that way with insects. Insects have actual muscle systems. But Spider-Man would not be able to do this unless he was really pumped up for the day. And of course, we know about spider silk. There are seven different kinds, some for web building. Females use a particular technique to make egg nets. And then as I was talking about with males create a special type of silk that they deposit sperm in. And then because spider sex is so dangerous, they extend their little hands and try to just touch the female genital open and get the hell out of there. Luckily for Spider-Man, I think he doesn't have to do that. You'd have to ask Mary Jane, I guess.
And then we wanted just briefly to mention the spider venom, because from a pest control standpoint, we get a lot of questions about spiders and if they're dangerous. And overall, we only have one medically significant spider in the region, according to Oregon Department of Agriculture, and that is the black widow, which is very rare. I was going to have a slide about how you never find them, but then we got 3 in 1 week. So
Spiders are friends.
Yeah. Deaths are very rare, but they have different types of venom depending on the different species of spiders. So there's neurotoxic venom from widow spiders. There's necrotic spider bites from recluses, and then there's one spider bite, the Brazilian wandering spider, that causes priapism, which is an erection lasting more than 4 hours.
So call your doctor if you've been bitten.
And then spiders also have a huge appetite, which is something that Peter Parker would definitely have if he's doing all this cardio all day long, swinging around. And then there's one type of spider I really want to mention just because Peter Parker is known to be like the 5th smartest person in the Marvel universe. And there's one type of spider that has object permanence. So that's something that 2-year-olds develop. Like, it comes late. It's not something we're born with, and this spider has it, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, especially given their brain is not a brain.
Yes.
It's very cool.
So overall, Spider-Man gets high marks. And then, of course, his weakness.
If you find one, just abandon ship, it's over.
So then I wanted to talk about one of Spider-Man's villains called Hammerhead. You may not be familiar with this guy. He hasn't shown up in the movies or anything yet. There were about 40 different characters I started a list with, and we trimmed it down, but this guy I had to include. He talks like a 1920s gangster, and he's not based on the actual Hammer because that's a different guy. So if we compare him to a shark, which has cartilage as bones, that's pretty different because his bones, his skeleton was replaced by metal, which is not at all like the actual shark's skull. So really, this was all just an excuse to show you this slide because it is really cool.
From a comparative anatomy perspective, this skull is just amazing and fascinating, and every time I see it, I wonder where the arteries go and the nerves and whatnot. So.
And there was just a paper published, I think recently, that found that some hammerhead sharks are actually omnivorous. So
Yeah, the bonnet head.
Yeah,
The
so-
bonnet head shark has recently been discovered to eat seagrass, and seagrass is a super important part of coastal systems. But scientists think maybe it's because the crabs hang out in seagrasses and they're trying to go for crabs but end up ingesting grass anyway.
So they're just sloppy eaters.
Yeah.
So overall, Hammerhead gets a thumbs down. So there are a couple takeaways from this, and one of them is that it's really hard to find pictures of people giving thumbs down.
Yeah. We have lots of positive superheroes.
Yeah, so one of the weaknesses, of course, for sharks would be Sharknado. So we're going to go to Dr. Octopus. You may be familiar with him. He was in the 2nd Spider-Man film of the Raimi series. He's got the robotic arms. He's very smart. So if we compare that to a real octopus, which has many arms and is very smart, that seems to check out. But octopuses have all these amazing other abilities we want to cover. So it's in the EU, they're considered honorary vertebrates because they're so intelligent. They have a similar number of neurons as in dogs, and their nervous system actually extends into their arms. So that whole bit with the inhibitor chip in the second Spider-Man movie where the arms have their own mind, that kind of actually checks out.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and they're known to be fantastic escape artists. You sent me an article just recently, Mike.
Oh, so there was in the New England Aquarium in Boston where years ago these fish just kept disappearing in these tanks across from the octopus tank, and the scientists there couldn't figure out where the fish were going. So they set up cameras, and it turned out the octopus was opening its tank, crawling across the floor, getting in, eating the fish, and I think Kelly said the octopus was bringing the fish back to its own
Sometimes he
tank.
would bring it back to his own tank and then stash it under something. There was some habitat in there. It's just amazing.
And so they ended up having to put a special lid on top of it to keep the octopus from escaping anymore.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they have these incredible arms. They can do all these things with them. So they can actually taste with those suckers. They can regrow if they're ripped off. So it's got kind of like 8 extra lives there in its arms. And then they can use those, the light sensors in their arms to inform their camouflage. So they can actually change the texture of their skin. And this is a baby octopus, and you can see it's got all these little dots. Each one of those dots is a cell that's filled with pigment, and they're layered on top of each other so they can change their color almost instantly. Yeah, chromatophores. Chameleons also have chromatophores. There's a couple different animals that have them.
Some
Cuttlefish, yeah.
Dragonflies have chromatophores as well.
So this is we'll see if this works in a second. Here it is a diver swimming up. There's an octopus there hidden. So they can not only change the color of their skin, but also the texture.
It's incredible, right? It's so cool.
Yeah, so he does not want that diver to get closer, so he changes bright colors. And then he's gonna do this. So octopuses also have a form of jet propulsion, where they can suck water into their body cavity and then extrude it, and like use that to swim away very quickly. It's kind of taxing from an endurance standpoint because you got to breathe everything in and then let it all out real quick. They can also use this system to hold their breath, which is how they can get between spots in that aquarium. And then they can also shoot ink to obfuscate where they're going. And then all octopuses also have a form of venom. This guy on the bottom left here is the blue-ringed octopus. It has enough venom in its tiny little body to kill something like 30 people. So it's an impressive little
They're
creature.
little, they're about that big or so. They're very tiny.
It's the only medically significant octopus that we know of, unless you count all the times when divers would go down and try to wrestle giant Pacific octopuses for fun.
I don't recommend that.
So there's more abilities that we feel that Dr. Octopus should have. So we got this piece of art where he's got blue rings to symbolize the venom. He's turning invisible there on the bottom. He's got a jetpack. So we were pretty convinced that he was going to get a thumbs down. But then Marvel is launching a new Superior Octopus story. He just got a power upgrade that comes out in October. So maybe you want to check that out. He now has ink shooters instead of web shooters. He's got super strength and a brand new cloned body. So now he gets a thumbs up. And then their weakness, we haven't touched upon this. It's kind of the sad bit about cephalopods. They only live a short time. After they reproduce, they die shortly after. The last thing an octopus does is the mother octopus protects the eggs until they hatch. So once those hatch, she dies.
So yeah, they live small octopus live between 1 and 2 years, and like the giant Pacific octopus up to about 5 years. There's suspicion that some of the deeper sea octopuses live upwards of 10 years.
Even that's pretty light for a lifespan.
Yeah,
Particularly with their intelligence levels.
makes it very sad. They're very flowers for Algernon. So from there, we're going to go to Penguin. And Penguin, Penguin, if you've watched the Gotham series or Batman Returns, which I don't recommend you watch, it's bad. But you know him, he's a short little crime boss. And that actually checks out pretty well. And these are short, smelly, angry, aggressive little creatures, and they steal from each other constantly. So penguins, they have to build their little nest materials. You don't want to put your egg right on the bare ground. It gets cold, that's bad for the egg. So they steal materials from other penguins constantly. And of course, if we're talking about the weakness, it's other penguins. From there, we're going to go to Batman. We have a bunch of slides for this. Originally, it was a presentation just about Batman, because there's 1,300 different species of bats. That's a lot of powers. So we're going to try to go through this pretty quick and come back for questions at the end. So there's a lot of different kinds. We're going to start with their echolocation. So that each time a bat flaps its wings, it's able to breathe out at the same time, very efficient, and they can echolocate at that same time. And if you played the Arkham games, it's kind of similar to the detective vision, where they're able to get a lot of information about their surroundings very quickly, very easily, and use that to inform their decisions. And they can, of course, fly. This isn't something that Batman can do because he doesn't have actual wings, but he does have a plane, so it's nice to be wealthy. And bats eat a ton, which matches Lego Batman pretty well. When you're flying, that's pretty expensive energy-wise, so you got to eat a lot. Each little tiny brown bat, which is what we have, little brown bats here in Portland, they eat their body weight each night. And bats also have a surprising tolerance for alcohol, which fits in pretty well with Bruce Wayne there. And they're also the pollinator of agave, which is where we get tequila. So if you've ever enjoyed that, you have a bat to thank. And that checks out pretty well. They can also lower their body temperature in a way that most mammals can't. So they can reduce their body temperature to the ambient surrounding. They do this during the day, which is why they like warm spaces when they're starting their maternity colonies. And Batman's done that in some situations. And then they can live a long, long time. For a small animal, it's incredible how long they live. It's kind of a contrast to the octopus, which kind of makes sense why Batman hasn't aged. And then they also have an immunity to venoms. This is a bat we have here in Oregon that hunts scorpions, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's awesome. And then they also have pretty impressive regenerative powers. So this is a bat that was rescued on the left there, and you can see its patagium, the wing membrane, was all damaged. And the next year, it's got that wing back. And Bruce Wayne, of course, is covered in scars in most appearances.
Pretty amazing for mammals. We don't
Yeah.
really think of mammals having these regenerative capabilities.
It helps that it's mostly skin, but there's also muscles in those wings that they use to make micro adjustments while flying to change the wing shape to get better aerodynamic properties. And then bats can also climb fairly well. So there's a bat here on the right that has no sucker cups on its fingers, and then there's a bat that roosts inside pitcher plants. So I'd like to see that explored with poison ivy. And there's another bat hanging out on the side of the wall, so like it's Spider-Man. And bats also sing love songs to each other. They have complicated social lives, so that ties in. So we're gonna, here's your warning.
Cover the children's eyes.
So this kind of makes sense if you think of Batman as a male power fantasy. That's a power that I would include in my power set. And so that ties in with probably for ladies. She's this one really cool, this group of bats that make their own shelters out of leaves. We always think of the bat cave, but a lot of bats live in trees. And these guys take big leaves like this, they bite that stem, folds over, and then they can live inside.
It's adorable. It's the cutest tent on the
They're very neat little bats. And then I want to mention briefly bats and robins, because there's a bat that eats songbirds. And the name of this paper was actually Bats and Robins, so some scientist was very cheeky there. So,
Nom nom nom.
and so we want to get to this one little last thing. So there's a type of bat where the males actually produce milk, which is pretty unusual for mammals. Usually you only see that in hormone imbalances or things, but this bat seems to do it. And you can see its nipple right there in the corner, which explains.
I think falconers here, right?
Someplace. And then we're going to end on a downer here. Most of our bats in North America are in decline from a fungus called white nose syndrome that disrupts their hibernation and kills them during the winter. It was recently found in outside of Seattle. So if you like bats, go see them in the parks this summer. There might not be much time left for them. And from there, we're going to go into Catwoman.
So Batman and Catwoman, very appropriate here. So most people recognize Catwoman, and we want to compare her skills and the skills of other cat superheroes and villains and compare them to an actual cat. So we can't cover all the cat-themed heroes today, but hopefully this discussion will help you make a fair judgment of the other cat heroes out there
This
as
is
well.
my cat, actually. His name is Mr. Darcy, and he's wonderful.
I've also been told by somebody else he's very evil.
Yeah, Yeah, my husband's not a fan.
So that ties into the moral ambiguity and the beguiling nature of cats. There's actually a cat parasite which can alter human behavior as well, but we're not going to talk about that too much yet. Toxo, you'll find a ton of internet.
Toxoplasma, yeah. Another fun thing about cats as far as their behavior is they have redirect aggression. So something can anger them hour or two beforehand, and then they will redirect it on any inanimate object or somebody's hand coming by. And so if your cat ever just lashes out at you, remember that it may be angry at something completely different. Let's see, some other fun facts about cats is they have, so the vibrissae are the whiskers, and they actually have some tactile sensors on the back of their front legs there. The cat purr is super awesome. It has a large range to their frequency, and at higher frequencies, it mimics the cry of a baby. So cats will often go up to their owners with this higher frequency purr and demand food. At lower frequencies, it actually has been hypothesized to have healing powers for injuries, illness, and stress. And it's also been hypothesized for considering it a bone strength. Now it's tough to research this one in the sense that we don't want to depur a cat because it basically comes straight from the larynx there. And it would probably kill them potentially by depurring them. Let's see, the other thing is in the veterinary community, if you stick a cat in a room with a broken limb, veterinarians will basically tell you that it's going to heal. And so they have amazing healing properties, potentially contributed to their purr.
So you want to talk a little bit about their cat eyes?
Yeah, so the cat eye, so we're basically going to go on a little course of comparative anatomy here and compare the cat eye to the human eye. The first thing, the image on the left is the cat eye. I use the cow eye dissection on the right because their tapetum lucidum is really large. And so the structure we're looking at is the tapetum lucidum. It's this shiny structure on the back that reflects light in dark situations. And to compare how much extra light it brings in, if you think about taking a flashlight into a dark room and turning it on, and now surround that room with a bunch of mirrors and turn on that flashlight and just see how much extra light is emitted based off of that. The other fun thing about the tapetum lucidum is it's something, a lot of different species have it, and it's considered a convergent evolutionary trait, meaning that multiple species have developed it over evolutionary time. So these species,
Yeah, spiders
Spiders
have it.
also
It's
have
just
it.
really freaky if you're camping and you see a bunch of little lights
You
going.
shine a light out in a field and you see lots of little glowy dots. Congratulations, you found wolf spiders.
I was in Panama and it looked like they were like the ground was covered in glitter because there were so many spiders. It was amazing.
sharks, dogs, owls, sheep. So the list is pretty extensive. A lot of nocturnal animals carry the tapetum lucidum. Now, a little bit on the human eye and comparing the human eye to the cat eye. So these images are more representative of the human eye, and what we're looking at is the retina, or the back component of the eye that receives all the information. And there's, as far as receiving the image, there's two portions to it. There's the cones and the rods. Within the cones, let's see, we have dogs that have two color receptive cones, green and blue, and then humans have three, green, blue, and red. And it's debated whether cats have two or three. It's also debated on what colors cats can see. Some hypothesize that they can only see in bluish gray tint. Others think it's more similar to the dog, where we have red-green color blindness, but overall still have a fair color spectrum going on. Rods more associated with night vision, so they actually get turned off if they're exposed to daylight for too long. Cats have a ton of rods, humans have a ton of cones, about 10 times as many cones as cats do. The interesting thing, so cats have greater vision in the darkness, but they sacrifice acuity in daylight, and then humans, because of the number of cones improving their vision and taking in all those other colors out there, they have better long distance vision, and we're actually able to pick up subtle motion better than cats do.
And you find that trend of more cones to rods, that ratio changes with whether an animal is nocturnal, diurnal, or crepuscular. So bats actually have a lot more rods than cones, and they're very far-sighted because up close you use your echolocation. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the flexible spine as well.
All right. the spine in the cat versus the human. And so humans have 3 less vertebrae than cats minus their tail. So the tail has, I think, 23 vertebrae total. The human spine is very stable. And this is good because we're bipedal animals, so we're on our feet all day, just 2 feet, and we have to have that stability to keep us upright. The cat vertebrae column is very flexible, so lateral movement or side to side, up and down, and they can actually extend their vertebrae, and this helps with their running strides.
Of course.
So the flexible nature of the cat helps during free fall, where they're able to, say you drop a cat upside down, and we all know that cats tend to land on their feet. And so they use not only this flexible spine to twist themselves, but they also have a very good vestibular system, which helps orient them in space and figure out which way is up and down. And the vestibular system is basically a organ inside of the ear that helps with balance.
And I highly recommend looking up on YouTube some videos of cats in zero gravity. They do not take it well. They're just spinning around. It's really, really neat.
Now, even with all these things, and the cats also have padding in their intervertebral disc more so than humans. And we will still, as a veterinary community, see injuries to cats from high-rise falls. So if they're falling from 2-3 stories or more, there's a greater potential of them getting injured. Let's see, and then this takes us back to the comic book realm of the over-the-shoulder pose. And this is a highly controversial pose in the comic book realm. We've got Black Cat here looking over her shoulder. We can see her breast, we can see her butt at the same time. Cats can do this, very normal.
I can't do this, I tried.
And so the question becomes, if Black Cat has more of a spinal column of a cat, fantastic, this pose is normal for her, but she'd have to give up some of her bipedal movement and be more four-legged. If her spinal column is more like a human, now she has a broken back.
And Black Cat's an interesting character because she has a lot of luck-based powers, which ties into cats in mythology, and they have a complicated history with humans. I mean, they've lived with us for thousands and thousands of years.
So yeah, the first cat gods were developed by the Egyptians around 5,000 years ago, 3400 BC. Lots of different cultures have their cat stories, and I'm going to focus a little on the Japanese culture in the sense that they've got stories of cats that bring them good luck. We're going to throw Hello Kitty in there that was created by the Japanese woman. And then other stories, cats are more evil and can take actually human form. And so Japanese, while they worship cats in the sense, or really respect cats in the sense that they bring them good luck, and a lot of them will have little figurines in their home, they're also afraid of cats taking over human bodies. We both in the United States and Japanese culture have our legends of the devious nature of black cats. And then I feel like Catwoman fits along really well here in the sense that she just left Batman at the altar.
Spoilers, by the way, for...
Oh, sorry guys, if you haven't read that comic yet.
So here on the right we have one of those Egyptian gods, Bastet, who is actually tied to the Black Panther mythos. So we want to talk briefly about Black Panther. He has most of the powers of regular cats, but he also has powers from this big cat, which are a little bit different than small cats. They can roar instead of purr, but Black Panthers are actually just a color variant of regular leopards or jaguars.
Right, so we've got the jaguars of South America, the leopards of Asia and Africa, and the black pigment or the black change is a recessive allele in leopards, and they're actually less able to hide, particularly in the daylight, if they're black. And so I assume the jungle helps that jaguar get around and gradually become a more dominant allele. And then the dominant allele, the jaguar in South America. The mutation basically creates an increase in melanin in both the skin and the hair follicles. Melanin is that black pigment that helps us all get tanned in the Northwest during the summertime.
So one thing that's really neat about leopards is they stash their prey after they've killed it up in trees, which takes an incredible amount of strength.
Oh, so this is fantastic. So if you've seen Black Panther, and this comic book, this comic little strip right here indicates that Black Panther is able to take down a rhino.
This is a really common theme. For whatever reason, he fights a lot of rhinos.
These are endangered species. What's he doing?
He broke its neck, so that's pretty harsh to Chala.
And African leopards have been seen taking down prey 12 times their size. And we think about an African leopard, the males weigh around 130 pounds, the females approach 70 to 80 pounds. So we're talking 1,000 to 1,200 pound animal that these leopards are able to take down. Along with that, and we see this leopard here pulling up a zebra into a tree, and they've been shown overall to be able to bring up 3 times their body weight 20 feet into the air, 2 stories.
So overall, cats get a thumbs up.
And then we got their weaknesses.
If I fits, I sits.
So I've seen several people cosplaying as Squirrel Girl today, so I wanted to briefly mention her. She can talk to squirrels. She has similar power set to other superheroes in super speed and agility, all those sorts of things. She has a prehensile tail, which isn't something that squirrels actually have. They have a tail they can move around, but it's not like they can't grab
Not like
things
a
with
monkey.
it. Yeah. So one thing that Squirrel Girl does very well is she communicates with the squirrels and can take out opponents that she should not be able to do. So squirrel communication actually does exist and is something they are pretty good at. So these are a type of ground squirrel, prairie dogs, you may have heard of them. They make little barking noises, which is where they get their common name, prairie dog. And they can actually differentiate different predators based on what they see and then describe them to their friends. So they can actually differentiate the difference between a coyote and a domestic dog, between a hawk and a person. They can even describe the color of the shirt that humans are wearing. So that's pretty impressive. So it's not as much of a leap as you might think to organize those squirrels to take down Dr. Doom or Galactus. So overall, she gets a thumbs up as well. And then they have their classic weakness.
Oh, come on.
And then we have one last guy to cover, Tick. He is not invulnerable, which is a trait he does share with actual ticks. But ticks have a few other wrinkles in that they can spread diseases. They can do an interesting thing where if you're bit by a Lone Star tick, part of their saliva is similar enough to peptide in red meat that you will develop a red meat allergy and can no longer have steak or hamburger or anything like that.
That's terrible.
Oh, that's
It's horrible. So they also engorge themselves when they feed. So really, you shouldn't have that svelte figure of that we see in the Amazon Prime
You'd have
series.
to roll him around every time you eat something.
So overall, ticks get a rating of spoon. And then the weakness, of course, is DEET or long sleeves. So there are a couple other honorable mentions. There's so many of these types of characters, and we couldn't cover all of them. So we're going to open the floor up to questions in a little bit, but it would be remiss to not mention all these snake guys who are Captain America villains, because that's the natural antithesis to America, is snakes. And then here's a little bit of a DC equivalent. We got Orca there at the bottom. Coming to tell Killer Croc here that she's pregnant with his child, because Injustice is a weird comic. And then one of my favorites I wish we could go into detail about is Swarm, who is just a swarm of bees.
He's great, actually.
He's a swarm of bees. He's great if you ignore the part that he's a Nazi also. There's a bunch of Nazi bees.
I'd like to take that back. He's not great.
Does he have a central queen that runs
He
everything?
used to have a skeleton, but I think Venom ate it. So comic books are weird, guys. So we have some acknowledgments. We want to thank the people who were able to let us use their artwork and where we got some pictures from. So go check out Jeff Carpenter at table BB09. Check out his art. It's really great. We're glad we were able to use it. So questions? There's a microphone back there if anyone has any. We'll do our best to answer them.
You probably don't need it, but I'll stand here anyway.
Sure.
One thing that bothers me so much is how small like a bird superhero's wings are.
Yeah, so that's one of the things we see with bats is they have wings much larger than equivalent bird size. So for a bat that's the size of a robin, it has to have the wingspan the size of a crow, just because they don't have the hollow bones and things.
Management.
Yeah, so you really need large wings if you're going to carry something that's a mammal. We considered having some bird superheroes in here. There's about a dozen little birds. So there's like raven, there's mockingbird, there's nightwing, just all the robins. So
So many robins.
there's one character explicitly named Songbird. So I mean, there's a lot of birds. We'd love to talk more about them,
Yeah.
but
We agree the wings are definitely too small.
way too small.
Hawkman and Hawkgirl have sipiter wings, and they should have bugler wings because they're from Egypt, and they should have.
Yeah, there's some taxonomic issues also.
They're technically aliens, so maybe they match the ones on Thanagar. Yeah. So, yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed the panel. We'll hang around a little bit if you guys have any other questions outside in the lobby.
If you're more comfortable to come up and talk to us, it's fine too.
Or if you have ants, I'll take care of those for you. But yeah, thank you guys for coming out.
That was really fun. Yeah. It's a good one. Enjoyed that.